Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Farah, for the kind introduction. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good evening to everybody. Alhamdulillah, we gather again today for the webinar number 2, stakeholders, scientific updates from the international speakers. The Malaysian Association for the Study on Obesity, or MASO, and the Nutrition Division, Ministry of Health, collaboratively organized the Obesity Week Malaysia for the very first time this year. It is in conjunction with the World Obesity Day, which takes place on 4th March every year. Among the activities are to increase among the objectives are to increase the awareness, encourage advocacy, improve policies, and share experience about obesity. The one-week program comprised of a physical event that was held at the Sunway Velocity Mall Cheras beginning last week. We also have some social media contests as well as the online events, including the webinar series. Today, this webinar is the second webinar out of 3 webinars. Today, we will be listening to fascinating topics from 3 renowned international speakers from 3 different continents, from Australia, from the UK, and one from Brazil. Each speaker will be given a total of 40 minutes, where 30 minutes is for the presentation and 10 minutes for the Q&A session right after the presentation. Okay, let me introduce you to the first speaker for this event. Professor Anna Peeters is a professor of epidemiology and equity in public health and director of the Institute for Health Transformation at Deakin University, Australia. She is a public health researcher, particularly interested in the provision of information to facilitate objective and equitable choices in public health and health policy by policymakers, practitioners, and the public. Professor Anna was awarded the prestigious World Obesity Federation Andre Meyer Award in 2014 and the Churchill Award for improving the equity of population prevention initiatives. Professor Anna is the lead investigator for the NHMRC CRE in food retail environments for health. She also sits on a number of national and international policy research advisory groups, including for the World Cancer Research Fund. Professor Anna speaks regularly to the media and publishes in The Conversation. The screen is yours, Prof. Anna.
Thank you very much. It's a real privilege to be invited to speak to your World Obesity Week, so I really appreciate the invitation. I'm just going to try and share my screen, so let me know if are you seeing the right screen, or is it the notes page?
Yeah, this is your first.
Yes, that's the right one.
Excellent, thank you very much. So yeah, as you've indicated, I'm here to speak about an area that we've really developed in our research group over the last 5 years, which is looking at healthier food retail environments. So I want to first take you through a bit about the context, which I know you're all completely across, but I thought it would be good to revisit the context for why we look at it, so diet and burden of disease. Then I'll take a deeper dive into healthy food retail, what it means, why I think it's important, what we've done in that space, and at the end touch on what next, which hopefully will lead us nicely into questions. So as you know, diet is one of the greatest modifiable risk factors for the burden of disease globally, as well as in my country in particular, in Australia. And that's important because unhealthy diets have a range of negative health outcomes. So undernutrition, overnutrition and chronic disease, things like stress and fatigue and poor well-being, lower productivity, social and economic disadvantage, and of course, the reason we're here today, obesity. So I wanted to put up some of the World Obesity Federation maps. I'm sure most of you have seen them, but many of you may not have. So I really put these up also as a resource for you on the World Obesity Federation website. There's some fantastic data resources, and this is one of them. And I always like to look at this because it reminds me why we have these obesity meetings. So this is a map of the world from 1980, and it's looking at the proportion in each country of women who are living with obesity. And you can see the light colour the lightest green colour is less than 10%, and the very dark blue, of which there's none in 1980, is greater than 30%, so around a third of the population living with obesity. And if we step through time, so I've got women and then I've got men, I've got 1980, 2000, and then the most recent data, you can see how significantly the colours change with these 20-odd year time gaps. So this is women 2000, women around 2020. And then if we go back in time again for men, you can see that in 1980, again, there's either no data or most countries had less than 10% of men living with obesity. By the year 2000, you can see how much this had changed by, and once again, with the most recent data around 2020, the really high prevalence of obesity in so many countries around the world, and in countries where it really wasn't present at all, you can see that it's really moving to sort of 10 to 20% prevalence. So as I said, it's a really good resource, and I encourage you all to use the World Obesity Federation's website for that reason. And I think it is important to remember why we're here. It's not just the health outcomes, it's also the fact that it's a rapidly evolving transition that really hasn't abated yet. The other reason I think it's really important to focus on nutrition as one of the big drivers for obesity is what I touched on before around the double burden of nutrition. And so really what that's talking to, if you have a look at this infographic, is that in the same individuals, in the same households, in the same populations, and over the life course, we can see increasingly now coexisting undernutrition along with overweight and obesity. And obviously overweight and obesity and diet itself really relate to diet-related non-communicable diseases. But I think there hasn't been, until the last few years, a real understanding that we're talking about undernutrition and overnutrition coexisting in the same households in particular in a number of countries. So there are a number of reasons that the world is increasingly recognising that how important it is to deal with population diets and improve population diets. And what we're really interested in is the focus on the food environment. So food environments, as you know, are really significant drivers of what people do eat every day, whether it's a family or an individual, a child, a young adult. All people are strongly influenced by the food environments that surround them. And food environments in the broadest definition include both the formal and informal settings where people are either provided or purchase their food. So in the global context, we know that increasingly there are local, national and international policies that are trying to increase the consumption of healthy foods and at the same time decrease the consumption of unhealthy foods. And as we know, that it's very patchy across the world. There are some places where there's quite a strong focus on this, and there are other places where there's very little focus. But I guess with an optimist's eye, one of the positive things is there are a lot of things that we can actually do to try and improve population diets. And one way to think about that is across all the different levels or settings in society, if you like. So there are a number of interventions that can occur to improve population diets, which can occur at the individual level, so the level of the person. They can occur at the level of social and community networks, such as in workplaces. And they can occur really at that sort of socioeconomic policy, cultural and environmental level. So a lot of government policy is really targeted at that sort of dark blue ring. So there's a lot that can be done. And what we're really interested in is one particular part of that sort of patchwork of potential actions, food retail environments. And the reason that we're really interested in that is because if you look at this schematic, there's been quite a lot of research. So even though policy change, I would say, is still quite sparse across the world, there's been quite a lot of research on consumers. So the light blue rectangle on your right. And there's been quite a lot of research on government policies. So that kind of grey bar at the top. But if you look at how food is produced, manufactured, all the way through to where it's consumed, you can see that the food retail environment and the food retailer, so the two red box and circle, are really central gatekeepers to what people in society consume. And we know, and I'll touch on this a bit more in a moment, but we know that a number of characteristics of food retail environments strongly influence what consumers buy and consume. So it's the price of a product, the extent to which it's promoted, where it's placed when you walk into any food retail setting, all have a really strong influence on somebody's likelihood of purchasing particular food. So at the moment, all those marketing strategies strongly preference unhealthy food and drinks. And that's one of the big reasons why we're seeing such a large increase in consumption of unhealthy foods, leading to things like obesity, as we just saw. So we were really interested in trying to build a program of research around that sort of central food retail environment focus. And, you know, as I've started to indicate, one of the reasons for that is because food retail environments are such a large source of the food that we consume. In low and middle income countries, they're rapidly changing. So there is a lot of opportunity to try and quickly inform and influence the extent to which they're changing in the direction of using those persuasive marketing techniques to preferentially promote unhealthy food and drink. And we also know that those persuasive marketing techniques have the potential to be used to promote healthy food and drinks. And so we were really interested to work with food retailers to see if we could harness some of those strategies. And for people who are interested in a bit more detail around the sorts of strategies that are used by food retailers to promote food purchases, this was a really good review published a number of years ago now, which goes into quite a lot of detail around the different strategies that different retail outlets, whether it's a restaurant or a cafe or a small vending machine, can use to drive consumer purchasing, and really explores how we might start to use those strategies, as I said, to preferentially drive the purchase of healthy food. So I won't go into it in a lot of detail, but again, just to reiterate that it's really talking about how can you use things like pricing and promotion or marketing, if you like, and where something's placed to influence the consumer purchase. So in terms of where we might intervene to improve food retail environments, again, there are multiple levels we can intervene. We know that there are certain government policies we can enact to improve these food retail environments. We can certainly target consumers with information and engagement. And then there are a whole lot of interventions, which I'll go into in more detail, really working with the food retailer themselves to try and promote the healthier options. But just to touch briefly on the first two here, you know, the sorts of government policies or actions that can be used to improve food retail environments are things like the now famous sugary drinks taxes and things like advertising restrictions. So these are government policies that cut across a whole jurisdiction, but definitely flow through to be seen by the consumer in the food retail environment. When we talk about consumer information and engagement, and I'm sure Carlos will talk a bit more about this, but there again, a lot of strategies that can be used to support the consumer to make it a more informed choice within the food retail environment. And that includes things like labelling, like the example in the image here, but also increasingly things like phone-based apps to support people in shopping. So the government level strategies are obviously critical to try and develop a more level playing field. And consumer information and engagement is a key plank for any intervention in society. But we were really interested to explore what can happen at the level of the food retailer and what are some strategies specifically that food retailers can implement to support consumers to purchase the healthier food and drink options. And just to show you a little bit of a cartoon to demonstrate what my perfect world looks like. So the red circle on the left really demonstrates the current situation. So the image there shows things like public institutions, whether that's schools or hospitals or public transport, where really we are bombarded now across the world with advertisements for sugary drinks and unhealthy foods. And we see really high purchasing of these sugary drinks and unhealthy foods, which obviously leads to increased consumption. Excuse me. And we see very similar things in the private sector. So if you go into, supermarkets or shopping malls, cinemas, and similarly the outdoor private sector, if we drive on highways and freeways, a lot of outdoor advertising, for price promotions, 2-for-1 deals, and really attractive promotion of unhealthy food and drinks. I guess what we want to move to is the blue picture on the right, which is not getting away completely from the realities of marketing and food retail, but trying to preferentially shift them towards marketing strategies that promote much healthier food and drink options, style interventions. And so we were really interested to think about, well, are there some ways to try to move towards that reality in a way that still might make business sense for food retailers? So I want to show you a couple of examples of some interventions that we developed with food retailers themselves. So one we did at our university, at Deakin University. So there are a lot of commercial retailers at the university, so a lot of independent cafes. There's was no general policy around the healthiness of food that was provided to staff and students at the university. And we had a lot of vending machines. And Deakin University has a number of different physical campuses. We have locations in the city and in regional areas in Victoria. So we worked with the university to make the case that it was in the university's best interest to try and provide healthier food and drink, because that would lead to healthier staff and students. And they felt that they could support that through sort of a duty of care type approach. But they then had to work with the commercial realities of the retailers at the university and the vending machine operators at the university. And so they did a lot of amazing work with the vending machine operators and convinced them that they were going to include essentially meeting what we are calling healthy food guidelines. So just to give you a little bit of context, in Victoria, as in many other places, they are supporting a traffic light type approach. So green is the healthiest food and drink. Amber is the intermediate sort of health status of food and drinks. And red is really the least healthy food and drink, and the types of food and drinks that the government and the nutrition bodies would really like to see a strong decrease in sales of red classification. So this is all through sort of nutrient profiling. So I won't go into that in detail, but you know, I'm sure you're all across that. And so the university worked with the vending machine operators and said, well, essentially, we want all your vending machines to have less than 20% of red drinks and more than 50% of green drinks. So they really focused on drinks in the first instance. And what we're going to do is we're going to move to a licensing arrangement where actually only companies that agree to commit to this will be allowed to go for the vending license at the university. And this was the first time it had been done, and it was a really powerful lever for the university to use because they have a big contract. And so the vending operator that the university worked with decided that it was in their interest to make these changes, even though they were worried they might lose sales, but they agreed to do it. And so they converted all their vending machines so that, as you can see in that sort of top series of infographics, so they changed their display so that more than half of the drinks that were on display were the healthiest choice drinks, the green drinks. They introduced traffic light labelling on the machine so that everybody knew what drinks were red, amber and green. They removed the largest size, the 600 ml red soft drinks. And as a separate initiative, they were interested to also introduce recycled bottle packaging. And so if you then look at that middle bar, the grey bar, the results were quite striking. So we saw a 121% increase in the healthiest types of drinks sold. So that was primarily water, bottled water. We saw a 228% increase in amber drinks. So that's really like your diet drinks, which you know, we can have another conversation about, but it was a really interesting behavioural shift, and a large decrease in the proportion of the unhealthiest or the red drinks sold. What was really interesting, in addition to sort of achieving the health outcomes of this policy, if you look at the bottom bar, what was interesting from the business perspective was actually because at the same time they actually made the vending machines look a lot more attractive. They had a lot more advertising around the vending machines in general and how they were supporting the consumer. They found that they had a doubling of revenue, a doubling of total drink sales, and all that change was driven by the sales of the healthy drink alternatives. So really a lot of it was the water, and there are some sort of really low calorie healthy drinks. So it was really interesting and really spurred us on to think about, well, are there areas, there won't won't be all the time, but are there areas where we can work with organisations like a university or retailers to achieve these healthy eating or healthy drinking outcomes without necessarily compromising the whole business model? So I just want to show you one more example. So something called the YMCA Victoria. So some of you might be aware of the Y in other countries. It's essentially a sports and recreation chain. So in Victoria, there are about 56 different YMCA centres, sports and recreation centres, and they were quite keen from a health perspective to introduce a healthy food policy. So this was across all food and drink. And so across all their sports and recreation centres, they worked with their cafe owners and kiosk owners to try and achieve their own benchmark healthy food policy. And we came in at the very beginning and said, oh, it'd be great if we could evaluate this both from a health perspective, but also from a business perspective. And so they allowed us to access all their sales data and do customer interviews. So it was a really big study over the last 9 years. And we've just got the data now. So we've only just submitted this, so please don't share these results, but I think it's quite important because this is one of the first interventions that looks both across food and drink, and this is across 13 different outlets in different parts of Australia. And again, they used a red, green, amber classification. And so what they found was quite interesting, so quite different for food compared to drinks. And, you know, we can talk about some reasons for that in the discussion potentially. What they found was definitely a large decrease in the proportion of the unhealthiest food sold of around 15%, but most of that was replaced by an increase in the amber food purchases. So there was a shift, but there was not much shift to the healthiest food options, which is interesting. People still went to these sport and recreation centres wanting something that perhaps was seen more as a treat. But what the sport and recreation centres had done was tried to modify a lot of their food offerings so that those treats were healthier than previously. But as you can see here, there was no change in purchase of the green food. When we looked at the drinks, however, we saw a large decrease again in the purchase of the unhealthiest or red drinks sold, and that was primarily replaced by a purchase of the healthiest drinks. So very similar to what we'd seen at the university. There's a large appetite, I think, for healthier drink options. We also then were able to look at energy density and sugar. And we found both in the drink purchases and in the food purchases overall, a small but significant decrease in the overall energy density of the foods purchased across all 13 of these sports and recreation centres. And similarly, we saw a decrease in the sugar content, both of the drinks and the foods purchased. And what I don't have here as a slide, but is quite relevant, we also found in terms of the sales, so the revenue to these different cafe owners, that there was no change in the revenue for food, but there was a small decrease in the revenue for drinks. So they did lose some money on the drink sales, but they didn't lose any money on the food sales. So I think it shows, again, that it's possible in certain contexts to work with retailers to develop interventions that support consumers to purchase healthier food and drink options. And that in many cases, this doesn't have to come at the expense of the bottom line for the cafe or the food retail owner, but in some instances it might. And so it's going to be important that you know, they have a way of working through that in circumstances where their revenue is critically important. And again, we can talk about that more because there are some other studies we've done to look at how that might be mitigated. So I just want to finish off by talking about, you know, what I think the next steps are in this space. And one of them is what I was just talking about. So we're really interested to think more now about, well, how do we build the evidence base about outcomes that are actually relevant to the business owners, whether that's the university or the sports and recreation centre or the cafe owners themselves. As I said before, this won't work for everything. We still need government mandates. We still need consumer information. But there will be some instances where we can work with retailers to shift their business model. And to do that, they need to be able to also have information at the same time as we're gathering the health information. They need information that's relevant to them. And some of the outcomes that we've worked with retailers on to try and identify positive and negative impacts on their business are, as I've just shown you, things like item sales and revenue, but also things like customer satisfaction. So we've done some really interesting studies with some of our retailers where even if their revenue is going down, if their customers are really happy, they see that as an indication of future revenue. And so they're very happy then to shift to the healthier options. So just to finish, there are a whole lot of other things, I think, that it's quite an emerging area. There's a number of other programs of research that I would encourage any of you who are interested to work through. And one of those is that space of co-designing new interventions. So as I said, in the context where it's relevant, I think it's quite exciting to think about how we might co-design interventions that are good for health outcomes. Excuse me. As I've said, I think we need to think more about the business impacts of some of these strategies where appropriate. There's emerging evidence now in low and middle income countries. So again, it'd be great to hear from some of the audience about initiatives that you might know of in your country. And then obviously these are a lot of interventions that are in their early stages. So we need to think about what does sustainability and scalability look like. So we've got, as was mentioned at the beginning, a Centre of Research Excellence now in food retail environments for health. So the website's down the bottom. And if you are interested, if you've got some good examples, we always love more data and more case studies. If you've got more examples, then please let me know. We'd love to collaborate with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor, for the lovely and wonderful presentation. Professor, in Malaysia, I'm sure you have come to Malaysia, right? In
Yes.
Malaysia, we have a culture where we eat ataupun the restaurants open for 24 hours. It does not happen during the MCO period, COVID-19, but the government is planning to allow that to happen again, right? So I was in Australia 10 years ago. I went to University of Wollongong at 9 o'clock, something like that. It's quite hard to see any restaurants or food retailers outlet open at that time, isn't it? It's become quiet at that time. So in terms of this situation, what is your advice, or what do you suggest to, to cover or to react to this 24 hours food restaurants opening again?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other difference is I think you have a much stronger sort of informal food environment, whereas in Australia it's much more formal settings, a lot of formal restaurants. So I think there are some really important differences. I agree. One of the things we're doing a project with UNICEF at the moment with some of the countries in the region. And one of the things that is striking to me, I kind of touched on in that next step slide, which is about kind of co-design. So I think that what we have found is if we can partner with organisations that are already interested to change, so they've already got other reasons why they might like to promote healthier food, they're the ones to find. And then if you can work with them to test a particular intervention and show that it has both health outcomes, but is also good for business, maybe promotes more customers, gets more publicity through, local community advertising, then that's a really good way for other businesses to say, oh, I want to be like that business. So I think really using business networks in your smaller communities and trying to find the early adopters is how you'll develop interventions that are relevant, as you say, to the kind of 24-hour more informal culture.
All right, thank you for that answer. With that, I'm opening to the floor. I can see Dr. Puan Rokia is raising up.
Thank you very much, Dr. Azdie. Good evening. Thanks very much, Prof. Anna, for the very comprehensive presentation, what's happening there. Now, I noticed you have actually categorized your food products, the food that you have worked on, based on AMBER and certain nutrient profiling. May I know what type of nutrient profiling have you adopted for that? Because in Malaysia, we have well, we have the Healthier Choice logo. Yeah, that, and I think from yesterday's presentation, yeah, Dr. Azdie, it was indicated about 400 of our products are actually being labeled as Healthier Choice. Yeah, and we basically looked at the macronutrients and some nutrients of interest here. So we in Malaysia we adopt the choices logo as well, choices criteria, and we do not adopt fully, but we adapt that as well. Yeah, just wondered what you had used in your study.
Yeah, sure. So the Victorian government has developed a healthy choices guideline. So they have, and it's very similar to the international guidelines, like the ones you're talking about, but adapted for the local context. I can put the link in the chat if people are interested, but essentially it's quite a complicated nutrient profiling system that the Victorian government has specified, not only nutrients, but also then relative to certain foods. So they've really tried to localize it, make it relevant to the local context. So it's a similar system, but I think it would have different details, if that makes sense. It'll have different levels of nutrients in different foods. So if people are interested, I can put that in the chat while we're all talking.
Yeah, because in Australia, if I'm not mistaken, they also use the reference for the Heart Foundation, right? For the Healthier Choice logo. Yeah,
not anymore so much. They used to use the tick from the Heart Foundation. That's not there so much. So now across the country, they've got a star. We've got a star labeling system that there's a lot of debate about. And then the different states have their own systems. I would say it's not a particularly standardized approach.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Azdie.
Thank you, Parokia. There is a question in the chat box. Let me read it. It is from our friend from Indonesia, Dr. Judy. Insightful sharing, Dr. Peeters. I would like to know the initial processes to advocate the university to be on board on this call. After all, the university is also an industry who have some profit interest.
It's a very good question. So I can tell you it took me 3 years of conversations at the highest level. And really it was a matter of, in the end, it was a matter of demonstrating. So we had started that work with the YMCA, and we could demonstrate finally that with the drinks, there were a number of locations where they had changed their drinks and not lost sales. And so once we had some data to take to the university leadership, and because a lot of us work in this public health, public nutrition space, we were able to say, on the one hand, we look a bit hypocritical if we've got world leaders in this content area and we're not putting any policies in place, but we understand it's a risk. So we've also developed this evidence that suggests that if you tried to do just this, just with drinks, just very small, that you'll be okay. And so we did it all as a trial. So they agreed to do it as a trial. We couldn't get it in as policy. And so there was always a possibility for them to back out if it was terrible. But then they became, so what we then did is we also then, once they started to trial it, we promoted it really widely. So we worked with government, with the nutrition groups, with the public health groups to really showcase, oh, look what Deacon's doing. They're being a leader. Look at these exciting things that they're doing. And so they got a lot of positive reinforcement. And then other universities started to come to them to say, oh, how are you doing it? And so then that sort of became a really virtuous cycle. And they very much then took the front foot. And now they are convening working groups across the country to look at how different universities can do it. But I'd have to say it was a slow process. We had to really de-risk it, and we had to really point out the kind of hypocrisy of housing a whole lot of world leaders and then not really doing anything in that space.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Peeters. Thank you, Azdie.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Judy. I'm seeing also, I can take another 1 or 2 questions. We still have a little bit more time. William, Dr. William Ng Si-ho, would you like to ask question directly to Professor Anna Peeters?
Yes, Prof. Anna. So thanks for the nice sharing. I just want to ask, because taking into considerations of industries actually need to be empowered. So in Malaysia, I think a lot of the industry here, maybe I'm talking about the, I mean, in terms of the university or the sport recreations, they might not have the ability to what we call classified the food that is permitted or not permitted. So I'm thinking that what are the support that have your team been given? And we also kind of like feeling the need to actually keep on supporting them, because industry, we are saying in the setting of like university or sport, the turnover rate might be a lot more different compared depending on the scenario. So you need a continuous support to this industry, helping them to classify. So would you want to elaborate on your experience in this area? Thank you very much.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll say two different things. So one is I also don't want to downplay the tensions in working with, you know, the food industry in whatever form. So that is something we're constantly grappling with. It's very important to us. So we don't take any money from any of the retailers that we work with. We started very much in sort of the health promoting industries, so sports and recreation, hospitals, universities, so that we could really work with groups that we knew wanted to improve health outcomes. So that's kind of where we started, food retailers in those settings, so that we could work with the hospital leadership as well as the food retailer, or the university leadership as well as the food retailer. So I think that's a whole other conversation, but, you know, there are a lot of tensions in not wanting to compromise yourself as a public health researcher, but still trying to work innovatively with the food industry to get them to move to a healthier kind of set of promotions. In terms of your more specific question, yes, so what we did was we mobilised a lot of our nutrition students. So our nutrition students across Deakin University and another big university in Victoria, Monash University, they have a lot of nutrition dietetics students. And in their final year, they all have to do a work placement. So they do 12 weeks, I think it is, supporting anybody across Victoria in nutrition. So they're not qualified yet, but they're almost qualified. And so what we did, because when we worked, for example, with the hospitals, they had their own dietitians. So the dietitians in the hospitals could do what you're saying and do all the classifications. But when we worked with the sport and recreation centres, they didn't have any of that knowledge. So we got, you know, week after week, we would get 4 dietetics and nutrition students to go in and do all their classifications for them. They would get the menus, they would work through the menus of the cafe, and they would come back with the red, amber, green classifications. So I don't know if you've got student banks like that you can rely on, but it was really good for the students because they got to work with industry and do a public health placement, and it was a really good kind of free resource basically for the sport and recreation cafe owners.
Thanks for the information. I think it's very enlightening because we can optimize whatever resources that we have, and actually the student also can get the experience from that. Yeah, thank you very much for the sharing.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, Prof. Smile.
Sorry, thanks, Azdie. Yes, Anna, yeah, I've been following your talk. Really some interesting examples that you have given us. But just from, it's more of asking you what currently is mandated and what are voluntary in terms of, you know, things. How do you see those mandated ones? Probably you can see some improvement, or whether the voluntary ones is doing any better or not. I'm not too sure from your experience, because in Malaysia, once the word is mandated, then it's difficult. I mean, people, they have to follow it, you know. But currently, we are more relaxed. We just say it's up to the industries that they can. It's voluntary, you know. So they're doing it on a voluntary basis. So how do you see if it's mandated? Is there anyone floating with the rules? Any case before something like that? Do you have any examples in Australia?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. So in Victoria, nothing is mandated. In no settings is it mandated. So that's one of the reasons we started this work, because the YMCA decided to just do it themselves. And we thought, well, this is the only way we're going to get evidence is by partnering with an organisation that's an early adopter and has decided to move by themselves. So in Victoria, there's nothing mandated. And I think my view, I agree with you that mandated can be hard. My view would be, it'd be good if we had a lot more mandated. it because one of the reasons actually is to support the industry. Without a mandate, you don't have a level playing field. And so a lot of, so say these sports and recreation centres or the cafes and health services, they will change because they see the health benefit, but they worry all the time that their customers just go to another cafe that still has all the old unhealthy foods. So I think one of the benefits for mandating is not just to get the health outcome, it's also to support the businesses to move, so there's a level playing field. And in New South Wales, so after we had done the sugary drinks work and shown that you could make those changes and still have okay business outcomes, New South Wales mandated it for all their health services. So I've watched Victoria and New South Wales, and now I think Victoria is considering mandating it after watching New South Wales, because it's so much easier in the end to make it happen once it's mandated. But I agree with you, it has different challenges.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Ismail and everybody. Indeed, environment is a very important factors to influence the healthy diet, isn't it? Even though our government is promoting the quarter half campaign, but if the environment, for example, giant food industries, fast food is serving the big size of portions, things like that, I think there's a lot of more things to do to change the culture, indeed. Thank you very much, Professor Anna Peeters, for the good sharing.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we now move to the second presenter for today, Dr. Tim Lobstein. Dr. Tim Lobstein is the Policy Director for the World Obesity Federation based in London, UK. He is also an adjunct professor at the Public Health Advocacy Institute of Western Australia, Curtin University. Dr. Lobstein is an occasional consultant to the World Health Organization, the European Commission, the UK government's Public Health England, and various other authorities and non-governmental organizations internationally. Dr. Lobstein has special interest in child obesity, on marketing food and beverages to children, on nutrition policies and programs, and on health inequalities and income disparities. Dr. Lobstein has extensive experience in policy analysis, policy dissemination, evidence reviews, and advocacy. Please welcome Dr. Tim Lobstein. The screen is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and salam alaikum to all participants. I have to update you a little. I think my website biographies are getting a little dated. I have retired as the Director of Policy at the World Obesity Federation, although I'm happy to say they continue to use me as a senior policy advisor, which I am. Also, I think my visiting professorship at the Public Health Advocacy Institute for Western Australia has probably lapsed, but I am now a visiting professor at the Bowden Initiative in Sydney, in the University of Sydney, New South Wales. So a little updating there. I'm still around, but I'm supposed to have retired. But a bit like Ismail Noor, it's not easy to get rid of me. Okay, I shall share my screen and we'll have a slideshow. So let me try this. If I go to this one, share, do you get the full screen slide?
No, that's your notes slide.
That's my notes slide, in which case, let me see if I can swap these over. We had this with you. Display set.
You taught
swap.
me.
Right, what have you got now?
It's not changing yet.
Uh-huh, oh dear. Okay, you still have the notes. Okay, let me close this.
It's still the notes slide.
Okay, I'll try one more time. So that's screen one, that's screen two. Try this, share this. So this is the ordinary. If I then go to display, I get this. And you have which one? Still notes?
Still the notes slide.
Looks like we may have to have that, so because I can't see how it's. Wait a minute, let's try that. No.
Yeah.
Oh, is it working?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Excellent. The only thing I see is that I have people all down the side, but blocking some of the text, but never mind. Okay, here we go. firstly, this is I want to say something about the picture. The picture comes from the World Obesity Federation's library of photos that are designed not to be stigmatizing or weight bias. They're designed to show that people with overweight, living with overweight, can actually be healthy, exercise, take healthy exercise, perhaps eat healthy diets and so on. They're not stupid, they're not lazy. They are people like you and me. In fact, I am definitely one of these overweight people. So there is a whole library of these photos that we encourage journalists and anyone wanting to illustrate stories about people living with obesity to use these slightly better pictures than you often see in the media. And they're free to download, free to use as much as you want. Okay, what I want to talk about today is something that I've come across fairly recently. I've been working at the World Obesity Federation. I'm still an advisor there. I'm at the University of Sydney. And I've begun to realize that perhaps things aren't quite as I thought they were. That's to say, I want to change the narrative a bit. So let me just say, over the last 30 years or so, we've been involved in helping a number of organizations, WHO, FAO, US departments and so on, in supporting their policy development. And you get all these wonderful policy papers reviewing what should be done about obesity. And we've had these now for 20, even 30 years. But I think it's fair to say that there's not been really a great deal of success. Across the world, obesity has continued to rise over the 30 years. It's affecting more and more countries. And in fact, some of the most rapid increases are now being seen in middle-income countries, not in the highest income, which are already at a high level of people living with obesity. So the problem is spreading. It's not being solved by the policies in these documents. Now, you can argue that the policies are not being implemented, and that's true. And people like Anna have been struggling to try and get, at least at local or regional level, some implementation of healthy eating policies. And these are essential to try. But I'm worried that perhaps there's something else going on that we're not fully taking account of. So, as you saw in the title of my talk, I want to look at endocrine disruptors in the environment. Now, my interest started, well, it was triggered mostly by this. This was the view from a hotel room I was staying in for an international health conference about 3 years ago, when we were still allowed to travel. And looking out of the window, it was actually quite hard to see into the distance. This was Bangkok. It was a hot, wet day, and you can imagine the pollution levels were absolutely appalling. I suspect KL has similar problems. They are just as much likely to be affected as Bangkok was. Now, that was interesting in itself. Yes, it's a health problem. But what someone said to me as I came into the conference hall was, well, this won't be helping the obesity prevention, will it? And I said, what? What do you mean? And it turned out that there are, in fact, there were papers being presented about obesity and pollution that showed the direct links, at least in animal models, between tire dust and exhaust pollution that can affect metabolism, increasing the inflammation and oxidative stress responses, and changing the way in which animals dealt with food intake and storage of fat. And this was news to me because I hadn't really followed this story at all. So I wanted to look a little more into detail in this. And indeed, there were papers all over the place. Here we are, particulate matter pollutants and risk for diabetes, definitely a cause for concern. More about air pollution and diabetes, association between living near a road and children's childhood body mass increases, evidence there. And indeed, a number of systematic reviews have been written, which I was really quite ignorant of, and I was ashamed about that. But there were plenty of these papers around showing links and systematically reviewing and meta-analyzing the data for these to show that there were links. And above all, the main links seem to be with plasticizers, a number of endocrine disruptors that you find in plastic. Now, we could argue that here's the increase in plastic production, and it is, of course, horribly similar to the increase in obesity prevalence around the world, but I don't want to make that argument too strongly, because clearly there are a number of other factors, and I don't want to lose sight of the work that we've all been doing for the last 20 or 30 years trying to tackle obesity using diet and exercise approaches. But it may well be a contributor, and this is the issue I want to raise, that plastics in the environment, and indeed other endocrine disrupting chemicals, may be contributing to the fact that we are finding it so difficult to counter the epidemic of obesity that has developed in the last 2 or 3 decades. If we look a little more carefully oh yes, this is to remind you of how things are going at the moment. So you do find endocrine disruptors in plastics from a very early age. Children are now putting plastic in their mouth in ways that I don't think I did as a child. We had wooden toys. I don't know about sort of 20 years ago, but certainly nowadays, my grandchildren do have a lot of plastic in their house from an early age like this. And maybe this is linked to quite early development. And maybe you're looking at that child on the left up there. If we're talking about breastfeeding versus bottle feeding, it does raise the interesting issue of whether plasticizers in the bottle and teat, which are supposed to be better now, but I understand are actually not necessarily improved, that it may be the plasticizers in the products rather than the fact that they're not consuming breast milk. That's not to say we should stop worrying about people moving from breast to formula. Of course, that's the wrong thing to do. But the plastics won't be helping. And I wonder if there is a plastics issue even in the story about breastfeeding and bottle feeding. But endocrine disruptors can be found all over the place. They're in agricultural chemicals, agrochemicals, in the mass-produced crops that we all consume. They're in the plastic wrap here. The plasticizers in that, and in the shell trays. If they're made from polystyrene, there may be some plasticizers there, some endocrine disrupting chemicals, even in healthy food like fruits and vegetables. This boy, sedentary behavior, we all criticize sedentary behavior, but actually there's furnishings, soft furnishings, carpets and sofas. The textiles used in household furnishings are laced with endocrine disrupting chemicals. It begins to make me weep. You get soft drinks, so you've got these cans of soft drinks, fizzy drinks and canned food. The insides of the cans are painted with a skin to prevent the food reacting with the metal of the can, and that skin contains, yes, endocrine disrupting chemicals. Plastic bottles, of course, which we drink an awful lot of drinks from plastic bottles. And as I mentioned, air pollution and tire dust coming off the tires of cars as they wear along the road. So that's just some of the various sources of persistent chemicals in the environment that have metabolic effects. Now, I wondered why this was all news to me, but actually, if you look at the data that's been developing, it's really only in the last 10 years or so. Here are the numbers of papers listed by PubMed from 2000 to 2021. It's really just the last few years, last 5, 6, 7 years, that we've seen quite high numbers of papers concerned with this issue. But there are now over 600 papers on it, looking specifically at obesity and endocrine disruptors, including 200 reviews and meta-analyses looking at the data from a wide perspective. So animal models and human epidemiology contributing to this. So we have the evidence now developing pretty well. And I think in summary, we can say that EDCs have the following effects. They stimulate the appetite, they block a feeling of satiation, so you don't feel full, they enhance the formation of adipocytes, fat cells, and they enhance the storage of fat in cells. So we have 4 mechanisms at least by which endocrine disruptors might be contributing to weight gain. And also importantly, they sort of act outside the traditional diet and exercise model that government policies assume for obesity prevention. Obviously, they will, if they increase appetite, then they increase what you eat, but not necessarily the shape of the diet, the nature of the diet, only the sheer quantity. And if they're acting on fat cell formation, that's really outside of the exercise and diet model. That's on top of it. So that's really quite interesting to me. Another factor, if you like, outside of our usual policy discussion. Okay, now the title of my talk was about what we're going to do about it. Well, first I have two questions that need to be answered. Firstly, are the effects of endocrine disruptors anything like as big or significant as the other obesogens that we recognize? High-calorie diets, soft drinks in the diet, genetic components, breastfeeding and so on, or bottle feeding rather. And if so, then we have to ask a second question, what are we going to do about it? Which was really the title of the talk. To answer the first question, it's possible to do a quick scan of the literature to see what sort of levels of impact are recognized, well-recognized risk factors have. So from systematic reviews, we can see that children watching TV increases their odds for developing obesity by 13% per hour watched each day. That's quite a lot. Maternal obesity, so if your mother was obese, then there's an increased risk, 20% increased risk of obesity in the offspring. Unhealthy diets, funnily enough, I couldn't find any sort of really high levels of increased risk taking the unhealthy diet as sort of overall package. 5 to 14% was the typical increase in risk. Soft drink consumption is specific in some papers, some reviews, and that's 12 to 15% in the reviews I found. And compared with that, there isn't any easily available data that I could find, but I think a more thorough search is needed for endocrine disrupting. There are some meta-analyses, and for children, we find that the lowest quartile, those with the least amount of plasticizers, BPA, in their urine, the lowest quartile have a 10% obesity prevalence. All higher quartiles had double that, 17 to 23%. But that's quite a significant increase associated with higher levels of BPA in their urine. And per 1 nanogram per milliliter of urinary BPA increased the odds of obesity by 15% amongst adults, 17% for children. And that actually would be quite a lot because, for example, in the USA, there's a range from less than 1 to more than 1 to more than 10 nanograms per milliliter. So that would be an increase 3 or 4-fold risks of obesity in the higher urinary BPA levels. So we're talking about quite equivalent levels, I would say. Let me just see if I say that here. Yes, we conclude EDC effects are non-trivial. They're not trivial. But I would like to see a formal analysis done of the attributable fractions due to different obesogens. I think this needs to be sorted out. And if anyone wants to do a research project and almost guarantee getting papers published, I think this would be a really interesting area to be investigated. I throw that out for general consumption. So what are we going to do? What do we recommend? Well, me and a colleague, Kelly Brownell, reviewed some what recommendations were being made in systematic reviews. We looked at 63 systematic reviews that linked obesity to endocrine disruptors, environmental endocrine disruptors in the literature, and looked at what they were recommending. Individual action was very common. 26 reviews said it's personal choice, you should give advice to patients, there should be public awareness raising. 11 papers suggested medical interventions, treatments to counter the effects of endocrine disruptors, testing for genetic susceptibility in order to get ahead of endocrine disruption effects, and population level interventions. That's regulation of endocrine disruptors, chemical risk assessments, restricted product licensing. That, not surprisingly, was considered by more papers than any others. There was an overlap. Some papers had more than one recommendation, more than one of these types of recommendation. there are problems, of course, with all of these. You can imagine individual action. Well, it's very hard for an individual to avoid obesogens. They're invisible. And by suggesting individual action, you're sort of passing responsibility to the victims. And that increases the potential for stigma and blaming individuals if they remain overweight. Medical interventions, well, that's a nice idea, but one at a time, it's quite tricky to treat everybody. Testing for endocrine disruption effects on patients, it's not easily available, and there are no EDC-specific treatment regimes, to my knowledge. You'd have to sort of work backwards about what would work, and I don't think we know what might counter the effects of environmental endocrine disruptors. And that leaves population-level interventions, which I think, of course, is where my money is, but it's tricky. If we look at those 60 policy documents, or 60 or so, that we mentioned at the beginning, the things that we've been involved with and others have put together around the world from WHO and FAO and CDC and so on, if we look at those and ask what do they recommend about endocrine disruption, they don't. In fact, only 2 of them made a sort of suggestion that there might even be anything to look at. The WHO Commission on Ending Childhood Obesity mentioned possible exposure to toxins, increasing the likelihood of obesity, and that's all they said. And the CDC more recently talked about the role of other factors in energy balance and weight gain, such as chemical exposures. They had no policy there. So we have a real dearth of, a real lack of policies to help tackle obesity if we're thinking that endocrine disruptors are a significant factor. Now, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals do have targets for polluting chemicals that impact health in cities, in marine ecosystems, and health generally, but not obesity. In fact, the SDGs have very little to say about obesity at all. Even the food and nutrition related SDGs don't really tackle obesity. And that's a serious policy gap. But a policy gap is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to link obesity prevention with environmental improvements, such as reduced agrochemical use, reduced petrochemical fuel use, reduced plastic use, and cleaner water supplies. So we need to be getting into bed with these sort of campaigns. We need to be working with these sorts of campaigns if we're to reduce endocrine disruptors as a potential cause of obesity. Okay, just to sort of round off, I want to think, what do we need for policy development? What would help? What tools would help us make our case? Well, firstly, of course, we need a robust assessment of the attributable fraction. As I said, this is a really important research area. I want someone to pick this up and look at how serious are EDCs compared with other obesogens. And in particular, which is tricky, EDCs that are one at a time, but also in combination, because we actually experience in the environment a whole range of environmental disruptors. And that's really where we need to ask, how significant is that? Not just one of them or 2 of them alone. And we have to ask, where are they most significant? Where are they most potent? Where are they most widespread? Is it in food? Is it in traffic? Is it in the water supply? Is it in the air? As we know, seas are becoming polluted. They increase our exposure both through marine food chains, but also being washed up on the beach, getting into the general water supply, being buried in landfill and so on. So rubbish, refuse is a hugely significant area for investigation of potential environmental endocrine disruption for humans. Okay, if we can get that evidence, we know how important it is and we know where it's coming from, then we need to get going. We need to start campaigning. We need to start making frequent statements from professionals, including MESO. We want citizens' demands for labeling of products, those that contain any obesogens, citizens' legal threats, and that's always a good game to play. It's often done in America. You take companies to court for putting these chemicals in products. And working with others, as I say, we need to work with those who are concerned with air pollution, water pollution, environmental degradation generally. And there is one current main structure for doing that, the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. But like so many of these things, this is a collaboration across countries, but there's no regulation involved. It requires voluntary country action, countries to do things one at a time. There's no world level regulation. So lastly, I just want to make sort of two strong points. Firstly, that we need to recognize that individuals are not responsible for endocrine disrupting causes of weight gain. It's really important that we do. If there is anything significant in this, and I'm now becoming convinced there is something there, then we can't be blaming individuals, and policies and narratives that continue to put responsibility on individuals are really a political decision to blame the victims of an obesogenic environment and not to look at the people who cause them. Okay, so that's my strong statement of the day. This is supposed to be an update from the international community. So I just want to note a couple of updates from last week. In fact, we had an interesting report from the United States, from the Consumer Reports Group, looking at food packaging and finding that paper and card, as well as plastic wrapping, was found in the wrappings of foods, even from companies that claimed they don't use them. So companies may not even be aware that the products they're using contain endocrine disruptors, and it may be found not just in plastics, but in fact in the coatings and linings that are used for food products from paper, plastic cups, paper cups, cardboard in pizzas and so on. So one more piece of update, that plastics, microplastics, tiny fragments of plastic have now been found in human blood. So we're looking at really, I mean, the whole world seems to be going to hell as far as I can see. This is absolutely appalling finding just come out this week. So we have an issue here. How much it's to do with obesity, I would like to see. I believe it's more than we used to think. But I pass it back to you and the younger generation to pick these things up and work on them. Just as the final thought, I give you the paper that Kelly Brownell and I produced recently on policies and how they deal with recommendations for how to handle and what sort of recommendations they have for dealing with endocrine disruptors that cause obesity. That paper came out a few months ago. So thank you for that. I'm happy to take some questions for a few minutes if there's time. Thank you. I'll close my screen and find a way of doing that. I'll do that, what happens? Yep. I'm still here. Yeah.
Dr. Tim.
Hello.
Sharing, and it is a big concern on our health indeed. Right? This is not my area of expertise, but I am just wondering, with all of these evidences, is there any research or studies in terms of endocrine disruptor inhibitors going on?
I'm not aware of any. That's a very interesting thought. That would be, how do you prevent these common chemicals from having an effect on humans? I don't know if that's the case. That's an open question. Maybe someone in your audience does know, but I suspect it won't be in the obesity circles that people are doing this. There's also a lot of interest in reproduction because endocrine disruptors do affect reproduction and possible cancers. So there will be other people interested in inhibiting endocrine disruption, but obesity and other metabolic disorders is certainly amongst the issues that need to be tackled. So my answer is, haven't a clue, don't know. Nice question though, and an important one.
Yes, okay. I'm opening the Q&A session to the floor.
There may be some chat. I can't, I haven't got the chat. I might just comment, while you're looking, I might just comment. I know we have quite a few nutritionists interested in this conference you're having, and I want to make it clear that I'm not saying that nutrition doesn't matter. Of course it does, it matters hugely. But I think there's a combined impact that we need to think about, which is where poor diets tend to be packaged in high-risk packaging. So we're actually seeing a double whammy there. If you have soft drinks, they're likely to be in bottles or tins. If you have fast food, it's likely to be served on plastic containers. If you have coffees, they're going to be in plastic mugs, perhaps. So there's a close association, I think, between highly processed foods, which Carlos Monteiro will talk about shortly, I hope, a close association between ultra-processed foods and the containers and the risk of consumption of endocrine disrupting chemicals. There are 1 or 2 papers that have actually brought those 2 factors together. So we have here an alliance, if you like, between nutrition and endocrine disruption, where both endocrine disruptors and better nutrition need to be tackled simultaneously. Have you found anything in the chat that we need to pick up?
There is no questions in the chat.
Hi, Dr. Tim.
Yeah, there is.
Yes.
Please.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Rosalyn.
Okay.
Thank you for the very interesting information about EDC. I'm just a bit curious because it's quite new, and with the latest information that we heard about plastic being found in human blood, and then you've mentioned about all the recommended policies that involve the 3 major groups: the individual, the medical, the population intervention. So all these policies are focusing on the things that already happened. But what about the policies that deals with the root cause of it? Any action taken from the international, community or policy developers on tackling the root cause of it, rather than just focusing on the complication that arises from the EDCs? Thank you.
Yeah, good, very good question. I like that. I think the third type of recommendation that we found in our review were the sort of international collaborative recommendations for better regulation of the production of these chemicals and their use in common products that we are all exposed to. So there is some work at that level, but as I said, it's a sort of voluntary area. Countries only tackle it if they're really pushed to do so. The Stockholm meeting that organizes the fight against these persistent chemicals is a weak organization. It doesn't have any powers. And I think what you're talking about perhaps is asking me to go upstream a bit and say, how do we legislate? How do we regulate industries that are using these chemicals? How do we tackle at the source of their use? How do we get fast food industry to use healthier packaging and product packaging? How do we get carpets and manufacturer producers? How do we get the agrochemical producers to be more responsible in the chemicals that they're using? And that is a very strong question that you have to really push governments about. And I think that's where my suggestion that we need stronger evidence that these are having an effect, and push from professionals, from educators, and in the media for action against them. And I think that's how things will change. If you can show that the cost of dealing with these chemicals, it's high, but it isn't as high as the cost of dealing with all the ill health that they generate, then perhaps you can make the economic argument that it's healthier, it's better to tackle these chemicals at source than it is to wait for the results and try and deal with all the health problems that arise, obesity and reproductive and all the others.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Rosalyn, for the questions and very good answer from Dr. Tim Lobstein. Any other questions from the floor?
It's not an easy one, this, because people coming from the obesity world have really not been talking about these issues much yet. Exactly. So it's not surprising if they haven't got questions.
Just information, see?
But I do encourage you to start thinking about these issues, because if only because when you next see someone as a patient or in the street who's living with an obesity problem, you have to think, what have they been exposed to? Not how silly they are, how stupid they are, or any of those. We have to think publicly about what's causing obesity, and that this is a social, societal issue. It's not an individual responsibility issue. So that's my main message.
Yes, exactly. It is related to the first speakers, Professor Anna, just now, right? It's environment,
Absolutely.
social, cultures, all in one together.
Yeah.
I can see Pan Rokia is raising up her hands. Please, Pan Rokia, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Azdie. I wanted to ask more questions, but Dr. Lobstein, I had to go somewhere, so I didn't know what was being presented just now. So the only thing I want to forward this to Dr. Wan Azdie, actually. A lot is being said about some of the researches that have been done, the current findings on endocrine disruptors and all. Dr. Azdie, we have the nutrition research priorities, right? I think Dr. Hamid Jan is chairing that. I'm not too sure, the TWG research, yeah? Yes. I think it's, having heard the two papers and having heard what Dr. Lobstein had raised as regards to the latest findings and so on, and something that we have not touched on so much, endocrine disruptors. So maybe we want to review or have a look at our nutrition research priorities, and whether there are elements that can be integrated based on what we've just heard, or in terms of research. And MASO, which is the Malaysian Association on Study of Obesity, I think it is very relevant to push some of the research agenda that need to be prioritized and re-looked into or re-strategized, based on some of the things you have heard. Dr. Lobstein, I'm very impressed with I'm a policymaker.
Thank you.
Yeah, so how important policies are. It's not easy, the soft policies and the hard policies. And what Dr. Roslyn had raised just now was very good, because she's trying to look at the source. And I think we need to go to the source. I mean, we can always look, why do we have to use these wrappers? Why do we have to use these containers, plastic containers, and so on? And then that makes it very easier if we address that at that point of time, at the source. So I agree very much to your answer. I support that very much. And being at the international level, I think you should push for that. Yeah. And at our front, Dr. Azdie, look into the research priorities, of obesity, and how we can further integrate some of the things that we have discussed in this week. It may not be there, so MASO being a research, research inclined association, I think we should be moving towards that. Thanks a lot, Prof. Thanks, Dr. Azdie.
Thank you very much for the excellent comment, Pan Rokia. Suggestions taken noted, and inshallah we will take care of that in the future plannings and things like that.
Now we should look into that now.
Yes.
Because our research priorities are already there, and I think this is also addressed the nutrition
priority.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Priority,
I can see that Dr. Wang Ji raised up her hand.
Thanks, Dr. Azdie. Hi, Professor Tim. Thanks for the talk. I like your talk, your recently released World Obesity Atlas as well. I just have I'm actually convinced that EDC is actually risk factors to reckon with. What is your thoughts on, do you know whether EDC is already sitting in the foresight obesity system map, or do you see there will be an updated version of this?
I don't think it was in the original one, not in any significant way, and I don't know if an update is really being planned. There's sort of a number of things have moved on about systems analysis and so on. So I don't think we'll have a simple update of that foresight map. I liked it very much, or the 50 odd different maps that it actually produced. I think if you remember, one of my slides showed how much of the research has just been in the last 6 or 7 years. It's gone up hugely over the last decade. So that was after the Foresight. Foresight was 2006, 2007. So we've seen a huge increase in the number of papers looking at endocrine disruptors since then. And I think as we get more information about the links between endocrine disruptors, ultra-processed diets, and health problems that are all sort of 3 in a row mixed together, then I think things will get more sorted out, and you'll start to see a new sort of a Foresight map with these sort of factors included. But you know, no one's done it, so you can do it.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts.
Don't wait for the UK government to do it, because they said won't. Not for a long time.
All right, thank you, Dr. Jean. And last take from Prof. Ismail. Yes.
Hi,
Prof.
thanks, Tim.
Yeah.
Well, I got the right person, I suppose, to brief us on this new new area that we heard of, but nobody talks about it. So I'm glad that you presented a very informative paper. In fact, your last paper, I would like to have a copy of that. And in fact, I'm currently editing we are updating our strategies for the prevention of obesity, which was first published in 2005. I can see your papers and your slides presentation fit well in our updated version of this SPOM, what we call SPOM, Strategies Prevention of Obesity in Malaysia. So thank you again for your insight on this new area.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tim Lobstein, for a wonderful presentation and sharing. We now move to the third presenter, or the last presenter for this webinar, Professor Carlos Monteiro. He is a professor of nutrition and public health at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil, where he chairs the Center for Epidemiological Studies in Health and Nutrition. His research includes methods in population nutritional and dietary assessment and the impact of food on health. He is fascinated by social trends and by the biological and socio-economic determinants of nutritional deficiencies and obesity. Professor Carlos has supported the Ministry of Health in Brazil in the development of the internationally acclaimed new dietary guidelines for the Brazilian population and serves as an advisor to the World Health Organization on obesity and nutrition. He received the Pan-American Health Organization's Abraham Horwitz Award for Excellence and Leadership in Inter-American Health. Please welcome Prof. Monteiro. The screen is yours, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you are seeing me and hearing me. I just, I'll share my screen to see if it works. Okay. So you can see my full screen?
Not full screen, but
yeah, the screen is there, but it's not full screen.
Okay, let me try again.
okay.
Just 1 second. Did you see right now or not yet?
Slideshow.
It is not the slideshow. Maybe
Okay.
bottom right, there is a button where you can press.
What about now?
Yes. Yes, that's fine.
Oh, okay, good.
That's excellent.
Okay, just 1 second. Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much for the invitation. I want to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity, particularly to my friend, Dr. Noor, that invited me to join this meeting. I'll talk today to you about ultra-processed foods and obesity. So this is the outline of my presentation. I'll start by defining, identifying ultra-processed foods. Then I will see the evidence that link the intake of these foods to obesity and other NCDs, not just obesity. Then we'll see something which is quite important, which are evidence about the mechanisms that link ultra-processed food to disease, and then we'll see some policy implications. Before defining ultra-processed food, we need to understand or to agree on a definition of food processing. What is food processing? I took here one definition from the one European food industry organization that states that food processing is any method used to turn fresh foods into food products. Of course, this can involve one or more combinations of various processes: washing, chopping, freezing, fermenting, packaging. Packaging is quite important, cooking, and many more. And more important, food processing also includes adding ingredients to food. So, I'm stressing this because some people pretend that food formulation or the use of ingredients is not part of food processing. Of course it is, and this is according to this definition. Where food processing lies in the food system. Food processing, of course, belongs to the food system, and the food processing which is done by the industry. So I'm not talking here about cooking or about culinary preparation, but about food processing, really. So the food processing is between food production and the food consumption, or could say between the agriculture and our kitchens, in the case of foods that we need to prepare before consume, or directly to the consumers in the case of ready-to-consume products. Just a few products, a few foods actually are consumed or go to our kitchens without passing through the industry. Some examples, some fruits, some vegetables. But most of other foods pass through the industry before arriving to consumers. But there are different ways and different purposes to process a food. So rice, raw rice grains that comes from agriculture are dried, are packaged. Milk is pasteurized. From milk, we can extract, the industry can extract butter for us, or olive oil from olives, and some more complex products that have more than one ingredient, like bread and cheese. Well, I just gave you 3 examples of the first 3 food groups in the NOVA food system classification. NOVA is the classification that defines ultra-processed foods. So ultra-processed foods is the 4th food group. But to understand what are ultra-processed foods, we need to understand what are the other 3 groups. So group 1 is made of fresh or minimally processed foods. You see some examples, but essentially these are edible by minimal industrial process. And minimal industrial process means that the industry does not add any substance to the food, salt or sugar, anything. The second group is made of processed culinary ingredients. So these are substances that are obtained from group 1 foods. And it's important, they are used to prepare, cook, and season these foods from the first group. So I'm referring here to olive oil, to butter, to salt. Processed foods are essentially a combination of group 1 and group 2 foods, like cheese and bread. So how the industry does to make group 1, group 2, and group 3 in the NOVA system? Basically, by using some mechanical, a very old actually process, like removal of non-edible undesired parts, drying, chilling, freezing, pasteurization, fermentation, milling. Processed culinary ingredients are obtained essentially by pressing, centrifuging, again, some mechanical process. And in the case of processed food, we have also salting and sugar. Group 1, group 2, and group 3 are consumed by humankind for centuries or for millennia, and they are actually the basis of traditional dietary patterns. An example would be the Mediterranean diet, made of fresh food, of course, but also group 1, group 2, and group 3 foods. But there's another purpose of food processing, which is not to preserve duration of foods, as in the case of group 1. It's not to make products, to make easier the preparation of whole foods. And it's not also modify whole food like bread and cheese that are essentially still milk and wheat flour or wheat grains or wheat flour. There's a fourth purpose, and this fourth purpose is to make products actually to replace NOVA group 1, group 2, and group 3, and all the culinary preparation made with these 3 food groups. And the industry does this by creating very competitive products, which are convenient, which are tasteful, which are low cost. So these elements
Professor Kawas, I think
yeah,
yeah, you're back now. Please reshare.
I'm back, but oh, it's terrible. I lost my connection.
I see.
For how long, please?
Just a short while, I think 1 minute.
Oh, 1 minute. Okay. So I need to share my screen again, right? Okay, 1 second. Sorry about that.
Yes, you missed just around 30 seconds.
Yeah. Okay.
Fine.
So I'm just sharing again my, yeah. I know. 1 second. I need to share the screen again. Can you see my screen? No.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Azdie,
Yes, Prof.
Azdie,
Yep.
maybe we share the screen and let Prof
All right.
talk through it.
Yeah, let's try one more time because okay. Did you get it right now?
Yes.
But not full screen.
Not full screen, yeah.
Okay, I'll try like this. Okay, to see if this works. Okay, so I was saying that the industry can process foods in different ways. So one way is to produce products to replace real foods or group 1 foods and processed foods and every other type of food. And how the industry does this, essentially by extracting macronutrients or extracting food substances like oils, fats, sugars, starches, protein that are contained in natural food matrix, in natural food, in group 1 foods. So that everything starts by, if you want, by destroying foods to obtain food substances. So these food substances are in a second step chemically modified, essentially to prolong their duration, as when the industry hydrogenated oils. A third step is the assemblage of protein, starches, modified or unmodified, into a new product. And the industry does this by using very aggressive methods like extrusion, deep frying, etc. This assemblage of protein or starches and fats, they are tasteless. They don't have texture. They don't have color. So then it's essential for ultra-processed foods the use of cosmetic additives. So additives are used in ultra-processed foods mainly to give the product sensory properties, which they don't have in nature, right? Because they are not foods, so they don't have color, they don't have interesting texture, and then with these additives, these products are made very attractive. And finally, everything finished with sophisticated packaging, because these products, they must have a long duration, maybe 1 to 2 years. And for these, they require sophisticated packaging, often using synthetic materials. And then you know already that we have some problems with this step. Okay. So how Nova defines ultra-processed food as industrial formulations made by deconstructing natural food into its chemical constituents, modifying them and recombining them with a myriad of additives into convenient, tasteful, and highly profitable products, because they have a very low cost ingredients. And these products should be liable to replace all other novel foods. So this is the formal definition. But it's much easier to identify ultra-processed foods. The definition is complex because the process underlying ultra-processed foods are complex process. But we can easily identify an ultra-processed food by UPF markers. So Nova defines as markers of ultra-processed food, that is, components of ultra-processed foods that are informed by the industry in the list of ingredients that are only found in ultra-processed foods. These can be cosmetic additives, I already said that, flavors, flavor enhancers, colors, emulsifiers, several families of cosmetic additives, and food substances never or rarely used in kitchens, like hydrogenated fats, protein isolates, etc., etc. And as I said, this we can find always these products in the market to replace ultra-processed foods. Another interesting attribute of ultra-processed food is that they are manufactured essentially by large transnational corporations. And this is not by chance. It's because actually ultra-processed foods are made of commodities, right? So then commodities that are commercialized in the whole world. So these companies have, because they are based in every country,
Prof. Carlos.
Yeah, we lost him again.
Yeah, we lost him again. We should wait for a few minutes for him to realize he is disconnected.
Dr. Azdie, you have his presentation or not? Maybe you want to help out with his presentation?
I think we can do that. We can share from our side. Oh, he's
Yeah.
back.
yeah, but the problem is it's not this, because I'm losing the connection because I'm not at my office. So
Do you want us to
okay.
share your screen from our side so at least it will save your bandwidth, internet?
Well, you have my PDF. I mean, if
I do have it.
So if you, perhaps this is a possibility. Yeah, you could, yeah, I could show this. I mean, this slide if you can.
Let me look at where you have stopped just now.
Okay, I can. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen any longer. Yeah.
Okay, I'll share the PDF slide.
Okay.
I think this is where you stopped just now.
And the next one.
The next one?
Yes.
This one, right? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Can you put in full screen at least?
Full screen.
Yeah, in file. If you put file, it's then full screen. No.
If you can go to the view tab.
The view again.
Yeah, view tab. If you could put the full screen mode.
Full screen.
Yeah. Bawah lagi.
Okay, yeah.
More. Yeah, this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, please, next slide. Okay, so let's go now to see the evidence that link ultra-processed food intake and disease. Please, next one. Here you can see that the evidence is very large right now about ultra-processed food and disease. Here you can see the number of papers in PubMed that use the term ultra-processed food. The concept was defined in 2009, so have just one paper, the paper that defined the concept. And then for a few years, there were just a few studies, but right now in 2021, we had more than one paper per day using the term ultra-processed food. So I'll try to summarize to you the evidence on this topic, but this is not easy. Next one. Here, just to give you an idea about, I took another term, which is important, the glycemic index that was proposed in 1981. So you see that it took 20 years for the concept to start to be used. And right now in 2021, there were less papers with the word glycemic index than with ultra-processed. So you see that the term is performing very well. Next slide. There are, in 2021, there were 10 systematic reviews on ultra-processed food and health outcomes. And what they show is that ultra-processed food is not only associated with obesity and excessive weight gain and adiposity measured in different ways, but also with diabetes, with dyslipidemias, with hypertension, with cardiovascular diseases, with some types of cancer, breast cancer, gastrointestinal diseases, renal diseases, and very broad, large effects on health. Next one. And again, in these 2 years, there were 3 meta-analyses, just on studies, on cohort studies, high quality cohort studies. And what these 3 meta-analyses show is that there's a dose response independent association between ultra-processed food intake and overweight and obesity, type 2 diabetes, depression, cardiovascular, and cerebrovascular disease and death, and with the very important indicator of all-cause mortality. Next one. Regarding obesity, which is our topic today, there were 11 cohort studies showing the association with ultra-processed foods. These studies have been conducted in Spain, in France, in the UK, in Brazil, in China, in European adults, in this case, the EPIC study. Next one. Most studies were on adults, but we have also studies on children in Brazil and UK, in pregnant women, in the elderly, and in another study in Spain. So 11 studies, it's a lot. And what's important, all of them show the same thing, and actually very similar relative risks. So this is a very consistent finding. Next one. Regarding diabetes, there are 4 high-quality cohort studies showing again the association. So this is the scenario we have. Next one. But perhaps, of course, all of these were observational studies, very high-quality observational studies, but they were observational studies. And of course, you know that always we can have residual confounding. So to confirm associations shown by observational studies, it's interesting to have randomized or control trials. Well, there's one right now, what's done by Kevin Hall at the National Health Institute in the United States. Next one. And what Kevin Hall did was essentially to put 20 people in a hospital. It's a crossover study. So for 10 of these participants, they receive an ultra-processed diet for 2 weeks, and then they moved to a non-ultra-processed diet, and the other group did the reverse way. Next one. As you can imagine, they checked everything, blood, and they quantify each calorie the person was consuming. So it's a very careful done study. Next one. So just to give an example of the diet. So each day, the people in the ultra-processed diet, they receive a breakfast, a lunch, a dinner, and snacks. And all of them had an average of 83% of energy from ultra-processed foods. And in the same day, the non-ultra-processed diet was 0 in ultra-processed food, right? Next one, please. So this example for breakfast, this is the example, next one for lunch, and next one for dinner. Next one for dinner, and this, sorry, the previous one, please. And all the time, people had, they had snacks in their room in the hospital. And they were advised actually to consume as much or as little they want of the 3 meals, and also of all these snacks. And the snacks, again, ultra-processed snacks, no ultra-processed snacks. Next one. So what are the results? Essentially, when a person was in the ultra-processed diet, they consume about 500 kilocalories more of energy intake. As you are the experts, I mean, you know, this is huge, right? So regardless of the type of meal of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so in every day, in the 14 days, they ate 500 kilocalories more. So this is strong. Next one. And of course, as a consequence, at the end of 2 weeks in the ultra-processed diet, people accumulated 1 kilogram of body weight, and they lost about 1 kilogram when they were in the unprocessed diet. Next one. And most of the weight gain was of fat mass, as we could imagine. Next one. So this is a scenario for the epidemiological and the trial evidence on ultra-processed food and disease. But let's see now mechanisms. And why is important? Because particularly for the association studies, if we don't have a biological plausibility, the causality is not so clear. So these studies, I divided them in 2 studies. Studies on the impact of ultra-processed foods on the dietary nutrient profile. And then you see the second type of mechanism. Next one. There was also a systematic review on with a meta-analysis done on dietary surveys, analysis of dietary surveys done in 13 countries. And the conclusion was systematically, so in every country, the effect of ultra-processed food on the diet was the same. The more ultra-processed food consumed, the worse the overall dietary nutrient profile. Next one. You see here some examples. Total fat, saturated fat, added free sugar, fiber, sodium, potassium, all of them were related with ultra-processed food in a negative way. So the more ultra-processed food, higher fat and saturated fat, added sugar, the lower fiber, lower potassium, and higher sodium. So it's the perfect recipe for disease, right? For chronic disease. So this is part of the explanation why ultra-processed foods are bad for health, because they drive diets that are profoundly nutrient imbalanced. Next one. There's another interesting effect shown by this meta-analysis was that in every country, the more ultra-processed food was consumed, the less consumed were legumes, vegetables, and fruits. So then people tend to replace these very healthy foods by ultra-processed food. So this is, in a way, is another mechanism. Next one. The same evidence for children in a lower number of countries, but showing exactly the same. The more ultra-processed food, the more energy density, more fat, etc., etc. Next one. And then this is a recent, very important study done in the United States using the NCANES study, showing that the association between ultra-processed food intake and the healthy eating index score, which is the basis for based on the US dietary guidelines, and also a direct association with an inverse association, actually, with the American Heart Association score. So adults and children with more ultra-processed food, they have much worse diets according to this score. Next one. But as I said, this is just part of the story. So by consuming ultra-processed food, people are consuming more sugar, more saturated fat, less protein, less fiber, etc., etc. But when people consume more ultra-processed foods, they have other problems. Next one. Here you see 10 mechanisms or 10 UPF attributes that are not related directly to nutrients, but that they may link them to disease. Starting in the lack of bioactive nutrient compounds. So phytochemicals are destroyed during food ultra-processing. Second mechanism, phthalates, bisphenol A, released from packaging materials. There's 2 studies today in the literature showing that people consuming more ultra-processed foods they have higher urinary concentration of these molecules in the urine, as Tim said. I mean, this is the double problem, because you get the wrong food and you get, as an extra, you get these dangerous molecules. Potentially harmful additives, also emulsifiers, for instance, there's increasing evidence that emulsifiers can be terrible for our health, for our gut, particularly, but also colorants, also with problems, artificial sweeteners, as you know, that many evidence that they can create problems for our health. They have an increased glycemic response. This is also demonstrated. They have increased palatability and actually quasi-addictive properties. So this is a very interesting topic for research. There's a lot of things that are going on right now. They are consumed in increased energy intake rates, because in a way they are sort of pre-digested. So people can consume 50% more energy per minute when they consume ultra-processed food instead of non-ultra-processed food. They reduce satiety, probably because of this mechanism. They have a reduced thermic effect. There's association between ultra-processed food intake and total water intake, and they also are related to increased pro-inflammatory microbiome. So you see that there are different ways, and this explains why ultra-processed foods are associated not only with obesity, but with several chronic diseases. Next one. Here you see in this graphic the dietary and metabolic mechanisms that plausibly explain why ultra-processed foods are liable to cause disease. And I'm showing this slide just for you to show that unbalanced nutrients is just part of the story. There are much more involved with ultra-processed food. Next one. Well, and this is important, the fact that it's not just nutrients, to discuss, and then we are entering the policy discussion. Because one of the answers that particularly the food industry tried to raise in terms of the problems with this product is reformulation. So then, but is it possible to reformulate an ultra-processed food and still keep an ultra-processed food but healthy? We don't believe this. We don't believe that a diet soda is a solution for soda. The solution for soda is water or other types of milk or other types of liquid, but not the diet soda. And the same thing applies to. Of course, it's good. I mean, if you can reduce the salt content of any product, it's good. Or maybe if you could increase the protein content, but all these other mechanisms that I showed to you, they are very difficult to reformulate. So then, essentially, product reformulation works very well for processed food. So take the case of bread. Bread in several food cultures is the main driver for sodium intake. So if you reduce in bread sodium or salt, you reduce sodium. So this is positive. But bread are processed food. So processed foods are not intrinsically unhealthy as ultra-processed foods are. Next one. So the policy implication, I already started to discuss this. Here you see this is very important. This shows the amount of ultra-processed foods that are consumed in 80 countries. So you see here that the leader in consumption, these are about sales of ultra-processed food, right? It's the only global statistics on ultra-processed foods are on sale. So you see that in the United States, the amount of ultra-processed food sales amounts almost 1 kilogram per person per day, 300 kilos per year. In India, you see that almost doesn't exist. In Malaysia, you see that's quite low yet. But of course, what next one? But of course, what the industry is doing. Yes, next one. It's trying to capture these markets, right? So the goal of these companies is to take every country in the list to the 300 kilograms, which is the maximum consumption. Next one. Yeah, and the industry, importantly, they are succeeding. So here you see the trends between 2006 and 2019 in different world regions. And you see that, of course, in South and Southeast Asia, where you are, the sales are still very low, but trends are increasing very fast. So then, unfortunately, they are succeeding. And they are succeeding why? Well, Tim already talked about this, because policies are not addressing this topic. Next one. So there are several reports from the lay press on how these industries are doing to push their products in Brazil, in this case, but there's also one New York Times report on Malaysia, if you want, if you can check. Next one. Wow, this is my two final slides. What we should do, I mean, we know what we shouldn't do, because we know what actions and policies are not working, because they are not impeding these companies to sell more and more ultra-processed foods. First of all, dietary guidelines that ignore food processing. So the situation right now is almost an absurd that any country can have a dietary guidelines that don't mention the word food processing or food industry, as the US dietary guidelines unfortunately do. But in many countries, situation is changing. In Brazil, changed first in 2014, then a few other countries, then Israel, then Malaysia, right? So Malaysia has a dietary guidelines where clearly it's recommended to the population to avoid ultra-processed foods. It's a big win. But many countries should follow Malaysia and Brazil and other countries. Second, it's what's not working, misleading nutritional labeling, because nutritional labeling, depending on when they are framed by the industry, they are almost like advertising, right? So, but again, we have some interesting experience on nutritional labeling that works. Cosmetic product reformulation, I already did this, so changing regular soda by diet soda, or marketing self-regulation, which are almost a joke. Second, next one, my final slide. So what are the real best buys? Dietary guidelines that recommend real food and real meals and avoidance of ultra-processed foods. Food fiscal policies consistent with the dietary guidelines recommendations. Public food procurement policies consistent also with these dietary guidelines, and strong marketing restriction and warning labels on all ultra-processed food. As I said, there are many countries that are going in this direction. In Latin America, there are very good examples of Mexico and Chile, for instance, but France is doing well. UK start to tax these ultra-processed food. So it's a process. It will take some time, but these policies are absolutely necessary if we want to overcome the pandemic of obesity that we know that is affecting the whole world. Thank you very much. I'm ready for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Carlos Monteiro, for the excellent presentations and sharing, especially about the evidence of the bad consequences by taking UPF, ultra-processed food. I open for questions. Before I read some of the questions from the chat box, is there any? Oh, Puan Rokia raise her hand. Okay,
thank you very much, Dr. Azdie. There was something that Prof. Carlos that you had mentioned, which I missed, yeah? So I wonder whether you can just clarify a bit more. As regards to misleading nutrition labeling as part of the policy strategy, what do you actually mean by misleading nutrition labeling here? Give me an example.
Yeah.
Is it possible for you to give me
Yeah.
one example?
Yeah. Well, the standard nutritional labeling that we have for many years in many countries inform the population about the percentage of daily requirements of some nutrients, like not free sugar, for instance, which is the big problem, but protein requirements, total fat, fiber, and sometimes some micronutrients. But the information is about the percentage of the daily requirements that are fulfilled with one portion size of that product. So first of all, they combine good nutrients and bad nutrients. So then consumer get confused because okay, I got just 5% of saturated fat. I can get more than 95% from other foods. So it's confused, of course. But now, right now, I mean, and then you have another generation of labeling, the traffic light, for instance, labeling. So the front of package, because these are very small letters in the back of the product. Now, the new generation of nutritional labeling is front of package, so the consumer can see the in front. And a first step was creation of the traffic light warnings. So then a product get green or yellow or red, but this still was not so good because the algorithm to produce the color, they had as an assumption the fact that if you have vitamins and fiber in one product, you can counteract the effect of sugar and the lack of fiber, for instance, which is, there's no evidence of this. So the new generation of front of package labeling is the warning label only. At first was in Chile, now in Mexico, Israel. So we have different countries using this. And these warning labels, they just say, if a product has an excess of any critical nutrient, like free sugar, sodium, saturated fat, or if they have a high energy density. So this is a much more interesting way to inform the consumers, right? And there are some work going on having an ultra-processed label on the product. So the people, so a combination of these two topics, these two systems would be very interesting to see.
Yeah, I understand what you're trying to say. I mean, one example that we have in Malaysia is on the front of pack labeling that tells you a product having a certain percentage of the calories, yeah, let's say 20% of one serving. So people can interpret, if you take one serving, 20 calories, and then that provides you about 30% of their calories, then they can say 3 or 4 servings of those that provides 100%. So that is actually, well, I wouldn't say the message is misleading, the message is correct, but I think any label, nutrition labeling must be educated. Consumers must be made to understand what label is all about. So it goes together hand in hand with nutrition education, yeah, is very important. Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Carlos, for your sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Pan Rokia. An extension of that, I would like to ask Professor Carlos perceptions on, because you mentioned about reformulating just now, right? Companies are reformulating their formulas, and you showed also the soft drinks and other canned foods. Should we apply, because this is happening in many countries where they have healthy choice logo everywhere, right? Should we apply healthy choice logo in these ultra processed food categories? Will this compromise message that we are telling to avoid or limit ultra processed food?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely essential. So one way to because you know all these nutritional labeling, they were born in one moment that we didn't have the evidence that we have now about how ultra-processed food harms our health, right? So it's clear, and they were restricted to nutrients. But as I show, there are at least 10 other mechanisms that link ultra-processed foods with ill health. So then an ideal compromise would be to have both information at the same time, right? Because if not, as you said, if you take diet soda, I remember the traffic lights, the traffic lights, diet soda were green. So they got a green label. So who in this life could say that artificial diet soda is a healthy food, right? So it's not. So essentially, by informing the consumer about the two attributes, the fact that they are okay in terms of sodium, sugar, and or they are not okay about, because in general they are not okay in terms of saturated fat and sugar and sodium, etc. But what about the food processing that was used to make that product? So if you have ultra-processed food together with the nutrient information, so then it would be perhaps the ideal situation, because it's quite good. I mean, if you don't use the food processing right now, I mean, we did some studies in some countries showing that essentially when you apply a good nutrient profile model, you capture 90-95% of ultra-processed food. So 90 or 95% of ultra-processed foods will be captured by systems that identify high sugar, high salt, high sodium, and high saturated fat, and high energy density products, right? But if the industry starts to reformulate more aggressively, so maybe going more to in the direction of diet sodas or adding fiber to, so they can add fiber to ice cream, for instance. So by doing this, they could very easily get a green label, right? But if you have an ultra-processed food label, then things will be more difficult. And I hope one day we'll have this system applied.
Right. Thank you for your response. I think that thing should need to be re-evaluated based on case by case basis, isn't it? Okay, I would like to take one question from the chat. This is from Dr. Gita. Nova dismisses the proven benefits of diets chosen with the right mix of foods at all levels of processing. As such, it does not take into account the overall nutrient content of the foods. What is your opinion on this?
Well, the question is, it's a very good question. The question is, as in my graphic, I demonstrate. So food ultra-processing drives the dietary nutrient content, right? But not just the dietary nutrient content, but the content of phthalates and bisphenol, by the content of additives, the glycemic index, the society, the capacity of society of food. So in a way, Nova and ultra-processed foods informs not just about nutrients, but about a group of attributes or a group of mechanisms that cause disease. But it's absolutely correct, the fact that regardless of food processing, we don't have to consume more than 10% of free sugar in our diet. We don't have to consume more than 1 gram of sodium per day. I mean, this is more than 10% of saturated fat. So Nova does not dismiss the importance of nutrients, but what Nova does is to allow for people to understand why so many people are consuming much more sugar, much more saturated fat, much more sodium than they need, and much less fiber and much less micronutrients. So in a way, Nova explains or determines the nutrient profiles. So Nova is one step before. And if we want to prevent a situation, the more we know about the causes of the problem, the easier. Because in terms of consumers, okay, you can tell people try to consume less than 10% of saturated fat, right? But first of all, people do understand what saturated fat is. How they know this? That's why you need nutritional labeling that works. But if they know that the product's ultra processed, then they will know that they are buying the wrong stuff, essentially.
Exactly. Thank you very much. I think there is also a question from Prof. Hazrin. Okay, he's already there.
Hi, Prof. Monteiro. It's a very interesting talk, and thank you very much for the talk just now. I'm just wondering whether with talking about ultra-processed food, the studies among for children in relationship to obesity and NCD is actually quite limited there. So do you think that the eating architectures such as skipping meal and not having breakfast and poor physical activity contribute more risk towards obesity rather than just ultra-processed food, or is it combination? Because I'm just wondering whether that's going to be the scenario. Because for example, Malaysia actually, even though we are less in terms of ultra-processed food, Southeast Asian wise, we are number 2 for overweight obesity. So I'm just assuming that's going to be even worse if they are going to increase it. So I just want to know what's to strike the balance here. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. Really very important, because of course, when I was asked to talk about ultra-processed food, not about the causes of obesity, and we know it's very complex. And of course, I mean, physical inactivity is quite important. Sleep is quite important. Mental health, I mean, it's quite important. Eating disorders. There's so many determinants, as you know, about obesity, that ultra-processed food is just one of them. But I would say it's one missing. It's one missing determinant many times. And why is that? Because it's new. I mean, it's a new concept, and the evidence is recent. So this is absolutely natural. Particularly on children, you are right. I mean, most studies are on adult population. There's one very good study, a cohort study, the Assoc study in the UK, where they follow children until adolescents and then in young adults. And it's quite clear, it's a very good study actually showing that what the child eats at around 10 years of age or near this age will influence the adiposity and the tracking of obesity, etc., etc. This is one study. There's just a few other studies, and you are right. We need more studies on this, and very important in the descriptive studies of the dietary energy intake surveys. It's always children and adolescents. They consume much more ultra-processed food than the adult population, and because, as you know, we are living a diet transition. And the marketing of ultra-processed food address particularly children and adolescents, because the industry knows that the adults, they don't change. I mean, people don't change dietary patterns in one day or 1 month. But if you take children, and because they are creating that preference, etc., etc. That's why I think particularly that the most effective intervention, we need all of them together, right? But the most necessary and urgent intervention is to forbid the marketing of ultra-processed food to children and adolescents. I mean, this is for yesterday.
Okay. All right. There is another question also. I think this is also interesting because it's too popular nowadays. It is about meal replacement from Dr. Sanjita. Would meal replacements be considered as ultra-processed food, Professor?
Yeah, well, this is a very good question also, because giving me the opportunity to say that as I didn't have the time to show, but all the evidence we have in the literature is about ultra-processed diets. meaning by that a diet with a high amount of ultra-processed food. So all these studies, they compare lower consumption of ultra-processed food with higher consumption, right? So this means that not every ultra-processed food is bad or is equally bad, right? Not at all. But it's a dietary pattern. And again, when we do descriptive studies, what we see is that ultra-processed foods are consumed as clusters. I mean, when you go to a fast food outlet, what you have a cluster of ultra-processed food, right? So you have the ultra-processed bread, the ultra-processed burger, the ultra-processed milkshake, the ultra-processed ice cream. So or the French fry, or I mean, you get a package of ultra-processed food. So, and we don't know exactly what is worse, what is less worse. But because we are talking about the dietary pattern, we cannot individualize. So, having said that, formally, a meal replacement product tend to be ultra-processed. Why is that? Because they are made of protein. If when they will be ultra-processed, if they are made of protein isolates or amino acids, or if they are made with food substances extracted from foods without whole foods. I'm not familiar with this field, but if you have a meal replacement based on whole foods, of course, in appropriate way, then it will be a processed food, not an ultra-processed food. But as I said, of course, it's not meal replacement that is causing the pandemic of obesity, right? The same thing could apply to infant formula. So infant formulas, they are ultra-processed in nature because they are done with food substances. They are not done with the whole foods. But this does mean that an infant formula is an unhealthy product, right? Of course, it's unhealthier than human milk. We know this for sure, right? But it's probably the second alternative to human milk. So then you have special cases, and I would say that the meal replacement and the infant formula are products you give to people in special conditions. Either a child that unfortunately cannot have human milk, right? Or a person that cannot have a normal diet. But so then what I'm saying does not apply to special conditions, of course. That we are talking about public health, we are talking about causes of the obesity pandemic. We are not talking about the treatment or the special care of people in special conditions. But thank you very much for allowing me to clarify this.
Right. Thank you very much for your explanation. That's a good thing being the last speakers because we can extend the time, Professor. Okay, last note from Professor Ismail. Please, Professor.
Hello, Carlos. ¿Cómo estás?
Hello, Ismail.
Bien.
Bien.
Bien. Okay. Yes, my first encounter with you, if you remember, it was in Yokohama, 2015, when you gave we gave a plenary talk on this ultra-processed
we must
food.
see each other in Melbourne. Hopefully, we'll be.
Hopefully, but okay. I mean, I know you've been a champion for this ultra-processed food thing, yeah, and you come up with this NOAA classification. At the moment, if I were to ask you, what is the global acceptance rate of this classification that you have? I know you have a lot of evidence, but some people do argue on the classification. So is this the accepted global classification now? That's question one. And I know WHO has been pushing for this agenda right up to the top, to the World Health Assembly last year. Yeah. So how do you feel this thing is moving? Are you at a bottleneck or still trying to, surface, or are you feeling good that this will in the future be the trend? I mean, guidelines are guidelines. They say never carved on stone, but it's healthy eating that we are talking about. That's why when I contacted you and get more information, we put a dot, we put an asterisk on right at the top of our pyramid to show it is as bad as having excessive sugar, salt, and other things, fats, So I think I'm sure we are not doing the wrong thing. We are doing the right thing, but we need a lot of evidence is there, but the acceptance of your NOAA classification. How do you see that?
Okay. Well, this is one of the reasons I included the slide on the glycemic index in my presentation. I was really, I did this a few days ago, and I was impressed with the fact that it took 20 years for the glycemic index to start to be used in the literature. 20 years, right? So then NOVA took 4 or 5 years to start. So it was earlier. In terms of research, right? Because then you have to make this distinction. So one thing is among us, we agree on something. The other thing is the policymakers. So this is another step. And so I'd say that we are doing pretty well within the scientific community, because more and more you see people, and even some people, that Kevin Hall that did a randomized trial, he was very skeptical about NOVA and ultra-processed food. And he said this, he did this to demonstrate that was pure nonsense, right? But he was very honest, because he said, I was wrong. There is a sense on this. And he's doing now, as you know, the second trial. I mean, with a second trial, trying to understand if it's more the energy density, or if it's more the palatability of ultra-processed food that make them be consumed in excess. But this is I would say, this is important, because it's important for us to know. But if it's energy density, or if it is palatability, or if it are the phthalates that Tim Lobstein talked to us, or if it's the additives, the solution is the same. It's consuming less of these foods, right? Because, and that's why I said the reformulation in this case will not work. It's about the same thing on cigarettes, okay? So what in cigarette causes disease? Honestly, we don't know, probably. We know some. We know some of the chemical compounds in the cigarette that is causing trouble. But what's the solution? Is stop to smoke, right? It's not to remove the, remember, you remember that the first reaction of the food industry was to reduce nicotine or reduce, the low tar, the light, the Marlboro lights, or this type of thing. So, of course, that was not a solution. Because, and another thing, which is interesting, this is a mantra in the nutrition world. People say everything in small amounts is okay. And it's quite true. It's quite true. That's if you smoke 1 cigarette per month, maybe it's not a big problem, right? but who smokes 1 cigarette per month? And the same thing applies to ultra-processed foods. I mean, you can't say to a person to have some foods once a month when this product is made to be consumed every day, every hour. I mean, the marketing, and this is perhaps the most important thing in terms of ultra-processed foods, is the fact that they are manipulated foods. And they are manipulated by someone that wants that you consume more and more and more and more. So that's the industry has the power, has the technology, has the additives to make this, right? So this is essential, the essentiality of the problem. But responding to your question, I would say that in the scientific community, I think things are going well. In the next, on June, I mean, the graphic I showed to you is about is a paper I will present on June on the annual meeting of the American Society of Nutrition. So there'll be one discussion about this. So I think, and of course, in the US is where I find more reaction, right? Because in the US is that where unfortunately many of the nutrition scholars and food science scholars work very in close contact with the ultra-processed food industry, right? So there's a problem, and it's the reaction I see, and I can understand. I mean, suppose that the most reaction against Nova comes not from the nutrition world, but from the food science world. But sometimes I think, what about if I work 10, 20, 30, 40 years of my life dedicated to help the ultra-processed food industry to make products? And then what about if I realize that these are very bad for health, that this is causing a pandemic of obesity, diabetes, etc., etc. What do you do? I mean, you can do two things. I mean, you could save my life, what I did in my life, what I would do right now. The second thing, you can deny.
Yeah.
And most people is more comfortable to deny. Yeah. And so that's my short answer. Is that? I mean, yes. So people have to stop to deny and try to see the data,
the face value,
see the evidence.
Yes, the evidence.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Ismail, and excellent explanation by Professor Monteiro. I think because of the time, we need to stop now. Thank you very much, Professor Monteiro, for the presentation.
I hope you had your breakfast.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or you missed your breakfast because you have to appear very early.
Morning, right?
We are having dinner. We are going to have dinner now.
Yeah, already at night time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for
good dinner
again. It is delightful.
Enjoy your day. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
It is a delightful session we had with all the speakers. However, every beginning has to end. Thank you very much, all the speakers, Professor Anna Peeters, Dr. Tim Lobstein, Professor Carlos Monteiro, and all the participants for tonight. Before we end, I would like to pass the session back to Dr. Farah. Thank you very much, everybody. See you in the next webinar tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Azdie. On behalf of MASO, we would like to thank all our esteemed speakers for a very beneficial session today. Also, thanks to the participants and viewers on Zoom and Facebook platforms. We hope to see you again tomorrow at 2 p.m. for webinar series 3, Scientific Updates in Clinical Management of Obesity. Please remember to fill up the attendance form for your certificate, and to all local medical doctors, please include your MMC number for manual CPD in entry. Thank you and see you again tomorrow. Assalamualaikum and have a good evening.
Salam. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullah. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks.
Salam.
Very good job, Azdie.
Thank you.